Thank you very much, Joan, and good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from London. It's a really great pleasure to be part of another Economist conference, albeit virtually, and I'm only sorry I can't be there, but thank you for inviting me and offering me the opportunity to take part remotely. Richard and I didn't arrange beforehand, but I think my remarks will dovetail nicely with a lot of the things Richard said, because what I want to do is pick up this theme of reform and highlight the links with investment. I mean, firstly, to say at the EBRD, some of you heard this morning from my colleague Andy Around-Tazi, head of office, about what we do. I don't think I need to go into what EBRD represents, except to remind you that we're really focused on private sector investment, along with selected public sector infrastructure projects with our partners in World Bank, European Investment Bank, and European Union. But as Richard said, and as others have said in earlier sessions today, there is still a big living standards gap between this region and the European Union. Now, just to illustrate, some years ago, my former colleague Jakov Milatovic, and Jakov now is Minister of Economy in Montenegro, we did some back of the envelope calculations on how quickly this gap could be closed with the EU standards, and under an optimistic but not totally unrealistic scenario, the gap could be covered within a few decades. So in other words, I might be still around to see this gap closed under favorable circumstances, but under a pessimistic scenario, the closing of the gap would take 2 centuries. And of course, this was the headline picked up by a lot of people who read our analysis and our paper. So what I want to do is really focus on the optimistic scenario. How do we close this gap relatively rapidly? And it is all to do with reforms and investment. Now, at the EBRD, everyone is in favor of reforms. So what do we mean by that? At the EBRD, we, for some years now, have been emphasizing the importance of looking at the qualities of successful market economy, 6 qualities in particular. So a successful economy is competitive, it's well-governed, it's green, it's inclusive, it's resilient, and it's integrated. And we've developed at the EBRD a methodology for measuring these. And when you look at the Western Balkans, what you see is the region lagging behind European Union members across all 6 qualities, but particularly in the areas of governance and green. So these are the 2 particularly weak links in the region, and it's partly why we at the EBRD emphasize so much better governance, and we have a number of programs to help this in the region, but also the green economy, the greening of the region. Now, when it comes to foreign direct investment, my colleagues at the EBRD have been doing some recent research on this, and I want to bring up just a few figures from this research. We have a large database of FDI investments over the period 2003 to 2019, covering most of the countries we invest in. And one striking finding for this region, and North Macedonia in particular, is the strong employment generation effect of FDI. So from over that period, the cumulative employment generated is in North Macedonia, for example, is 9% of total employment in 2019. But of course, with FDI being traditionally labor intensive, what we're seeing now is a move towards more capital intensive investment, and also investment becoming more concentrated among higher skilled people and in urban areas. So that raises difficult challenges of inclusion and ensuring that particular groups and particular regions are not left behind. But FDI, we think, will be critical for sustaining the reform agenda, and the reforms in turn will be critical for attracting FDI. I want to just refer to a couple of results from a major enterprise survey that we have done jointly quite recently with the World Bank and the European Investment Bank. I'm sure Richard is familiar with this survey too. and highlight a couple of findings. So what we found, firstly, it's clear that trade is closely linked to growth, is closely linked also to innovation. And firms that innovate in trade tend to be better managed as well than those that don't. But what we also found is that there are really significant obstacles to trade still in this region. So, for example, in the Western Balkans, 14% of the firms interviewed cited customs and trade regulations as a significant obstacle to doing business, and that's higher than in comparable regions that we surveyed. Another finding from this research was that 13.5% of firms report having to make informal payments in order to import goods. And that's when you compare that with just 1.5% of firms in Central Europe and Baltic states, that's a big gap. And that's really, I think, bringing out the deficiencies in governance, the problems of informality and corruption, which have bedeviled this region. So when we talk about reforms, I would really like to focus on some of these deep-seated issues that affected the region to do with governance, informality, weak public administration and the like. Tackling those, I think, is going to be difficult and will take time, but it will generate significant rewards in the long term, and maybe could bring about this optimistic scenario under which the region really does catch up with the EU within, as I say, within my lifetime, if I live long enough to see it. Thanks very much.